Robert Powell is one of the founders of the non-profit Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. He's written multiple papers about numerous UFO cases, including the 2008 Stephenville UAP incident. Robert was featured in an episode about that case in the National Geographic series UFOs, Investigating the Unknown. Robert's written 3 books about the UFO phenomenon, including UFOs and Government, a historical inquiry, and more recently, UFOs, a scientist explains what we know and don't know. Thank you so much for doing this with me, Robert. I really appreciate it. To start us off today, can you please talk a little bit about your background, who you are, and how you first became interested in the UFO phenomenon?
Sure. My background in terms of my education is I have a bachelor's in chemistry. Mm-hmm. And I spent probably much of my time, however, in the semiconductor field. That's the area of technology where you make the little computer chips that go in your phone and in your laptop and everywhere else.
Right.
I was a project manager in that area for, I guess, close to 28 years. Mm-hmm. I even got a few patents along the way. So it was a lot of interesting work. Cool. You know, you're dealing with some really sharp people.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I was able to retire early. So I retired, I think I was about 53 at the time. So I made this to-do list of, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life, right? So I'm looking at, and one of the items on the list was go back and look at the UFO question. Because when I was a teenager, I had read J. Allen Hynek's book, The UFO Experience. And I was excited about that, right? But, you know, life hits you. So, you know, you got to go to college, get married, raise a family.
Yeah.
So now that I had done those things, I had time to go back and look at the UFO question. And as I first began to investigate it, it became clear to me within the early time that there was something to this phenomenon, and it appeared to be real.
Yeah.
And of course, as 17 years later, I'm positive it's real, and I'm positive that it's intelligently controlled, and whatever technology it is, it's far in advance of ours. So that's kind of the story of how I got, you know, interested into this subject. And I've spent, I guess, to give your audience a feel for how much I've researched it, I would say during those 17 years, I probably average 10 to 20 hours every week on the subject. I've interviewed several hundred individuals in person. I've read thousands of reports. And 7 years ago, myself and a few other individuals founded a new organization called SCU, which stands for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And that organization has grown from basically, we started off with just a handful of us to today, there are over 300 members of the organization. Over 30% are PhDs. More than half have advanced degrees. So here I am with the bachelor's in chemistry, right? So I'm low on the totem pole as far as educational degrees. However, the organization also, over 20% is international, which is appropriate since it's an international phenomenon. It's not unique to the United States.
Yeah.
And we have members from the high-tech field, such as where I came from. We have current and former members of NASA. We have people out of the defense industry. We have people out of the intelligence field. Because believe it or not, the guys in the intelligence field are just as interested in this subject personally as, you know, you and I may be.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives the audience a feel for kind of where I've been in the last 17 years. And I kind of culminated all of this in a book that I published 2 months ago called The UFOs, The Scientist Explains What We Know and What We Don't Know. And that's it. That kind of goes through my view of the phenomenon and why that I think it's real and why I believe it's intelligently controlled.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a few of those points that you raise I definitely want to pick up on later in this interview, such as why you think it's intelligently controlled, and maybe what that intelligence could be. Maybe we can do a little bit of speculating on that. Before we do move on, I just want to really quickly ask you about those patents that you mentioned. If you could talk briefly about what kind of things you patented or what that was all about before we kind of move into talking more about UFOs.
Sure. The high-tech field, and that's what today most people call nanotechnology, right?
Right.
So one of the instruments, for example, that we use is called an atomic force microscope. And this allows you to actually look at the atomic level of the structure of matter. And it basically works by taking a diamond tip, and it moves it very slowly. And this is a very tiny diamond tip.
Yeah.
And so it's detecting electrically the existence of the atoms below it. And it's called an atomic force microscope. Well, one of my patents was basically it was to use a carbon nanotube instead of a diamond tip, right? Wow. And until I got into the creation of patents, I used to think that was something very difficult to do, but it's not really once you get the hang of it. So there's things you can do with patents that are really interesting. But the main problem is, you need an attorney that's going to push your patent through, and someone that pays the expense of creating that patent. And so the corporation I worked for, they were called Advanced Micro Devices, were the ones that took care of that.
Okay, cool. Wow, fascinating. Complicated stuff, way over my head. To get back to kind of UFOs and stuff, as I said to you before, I want to kind of jump around a little bit and talk about some kind of general UFO related things. And we'll probably kind of feel we're jumping through a little bit. We're not going to spend too long on each area for now. In kind of fairly brief terms, what are your thoughts on David Grusch, who obviously went public last year, and his extraordinary testimony under oath in those hearings that we're all probably familiar with?
Right. So David Grusch basically, came out and stated that there's information that indicates we have the United States has crashed vehicles and potentially alien bodies and multiple crashed vehicles, right? And I was surprised when I first heard that. And he made basically two arguments for the information he had. One was he had talked to individuals who he felt were in the know, and that's where he got some of his information. The second was he indicated there were documents he had seen because he had a security clearance to see those documents. Personally, I'm not as much interested in the people that told him that as I am the documents that he found. So to me, it's a black and white issue. It's not really a science issue, right? And either it's true or it's not true. And the only way to determine that, in my opinion, is for Congress to basically investigate it. They need to go say, okay, we want to see the documents. They need to find out from Grusch the specific documents he saw, and then they need to go look at those documents. And so that means they have to push on the military establishment to see those documents, right? Because these are supposedly top secret special access program documents.
Do you think there's any chance that they'll get that information?
I think it's very low, because I think the way the U.S. government works, I think it's very difficult for Congress to push on the defense establishment.
Why do you think the media have largely ignored Grusch's claims? I mean, I know it was picked up in a few places, and I know it was talked about, but for the kind of the gravity of what he said and who he is and things like that, you would have thought it would have at least made more news and more people would have known about it. Like, I still talk to people who say, oh yeah, I have an interest in UFOs, but oh yeah, I haven't heard of David Grusch. And obviously largely to blame for that is the mainstream or legacy or however you want to call it, the media. So yeah, right. What's your take on, again, I know we could probably do a 2-hour conversation just on that. Like, that could be a real discussion in itself. But what is your take in a nutshell on why the media kind of, largely ignored his claims?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I think the media, they want dramatization, right? And they want immediate reporting, and it's not in-depth reporting. And so when Grusch's statement first came out, there was a fair amount of media attention, but once, it couldn't go any farther, right? Because he couldn't give any specific details because of, security law. The media loses interest in it. And so then you have what to me looks like a pretty good job of undermining Grusch's, credibility. And so once that begins to happen, then the media really loses interest in the subject.
Yeah.
Unless, Congress really pushes on it, I don't think it will go anywhere.
Yeah. Have you met David, by the way? Have you met David Grusch?
Yeah, I have. He was at our conference in 2022, the SCU conference, but I didn't meet him at the time. I found out later he was at the, because there are a lot of people that come to our conference, and you don't know everyone. So he was at our conference, but, he just stayed, kind of in the shadows, I guess you might say.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to meet him.
Yeah.
I did get to meet Jay Stratford, who I know fairly well now, or Stratton, excuse me. I don't know why he said Stratford. Maybe because, that sounds more English than Stratton. I don't know. But at any rate, Jay was at that same conference. And of course, Jay was the head of the UAP task force.
Yeah.
And that's who Grusch reported into or worked with as part of his job.
Do you have any idea if we'll be hearing more from Jay anytime soon, or do you not really know?
No, I don't think so. I don't. Jay stays to himself a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we'll hear anything anytime soon from him.
Yeah, fair enough. In terms of disclosure, right, it's one of the buzzwords of the UFO world. Everybody, it's one of the buzzwords. What does that mean to you? Everybody has a different interpretation of it. What does it mean to you? How do you interpret disclosure? And where do you think we are in regards to it? How optimistic or pessimistic or whatever are you?
Yeah, for some reason, I just don't really like the word disclosure. I don't know why. I've just never been fond of that word. But to me, it's not something that I see happening, right? It's not like I don't see the government coming out and saying, okay, we have an extraterrestrial intelligence that's visiting our planet, right? Because it's not going to get them anywhere by saying that. So I think the only time that you have what people call disclosure would be if the extraterrestrial intelligence decides it wants to disclose itself to us, because I don't think a government is going to do that.
Yeah. And you're in a pretty good position to comment on whether the government would be in a position to do that, as you wrote the book UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry. So based on, your knowledge and research going into that book, why do you think, again, in a nutshell, because again, it could be a very long answer, like a 2-hour answer or longer, why do you think governments cover up this issue?
Well, in a nutshell, Ben, I get torn between, on one hand, that the government is just kind of incompetent about the whole thing, right? Yeah. That it's like, we don't know what it is, we suspect this, we suspect that, but, we don't really have any answers, so we're not in the business of telling the public we don't have answers, right? Because governments tell people we've got the answer, right?
Yeah.
So I'm torn between that, and on the other side of there being some level of a conspiracy to, that there's more knowledge, a lot more knowledge than what we have. Now, Having said that, I mean, clearly the government has more knowledge that they've given us. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
The question is, do they have a high level of knowledge? By that, I mean they've reversed engineered a craft, or they have a craft in their possession. Those type of things.
Yeah.
I'm I, I'm less clear on that than I am that okay, they've got radar data that proves they know this exists, right?
Hmm.
I feel more confident that they have that type of information. Um, and and like I said, but then I'm also kind of the view that they're not really sure what they're dealing with.
Yeah. 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 It's an interesting one. I think it must be to an extent both. I think. Yeah. I think there's certainly the incompetence and the maybe not knowing enough to feel confident in telling us stuff, but then at the same time, I'm sure that
Right.
there are at least sections of government, as we always say, maybe these kind of very hidden, small SAPs or whatever, a few individuals that know significantly more than we do. Yeah, hopefully one day we get somewhere close to it.
And I will say that, before Grusch came along,
Mm.
I was much towards the incompetence view.
Yeah. Okay.
And since he came along, and since the 2004 Nimitz USS Princeton event with the F-18s,
Yeah.
those two things, push me a little more towards, okay, there is some type of program in the background that we don't know about that has
Yeah.
been investigating the subject.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. In the sense that, again, I do think incompetence is rife throughout most governments, but I also think a lot of these people, representatives or whatever, these politicians, they are a lot more intelligent than maybe they want us to believe, and maybe that they even, try to portray, in the sense they're very kind of cunning and sly and, not stupid people, even if they like to come across as that sometimes, maybe like Boris Johnson of the UK, the Prime Minister, not anymore, the former Prime Minister,
Right.
is well known for curating intentionally a public image of being a buffoon, even though he's kind of secretly, I'm using this term a little bit, like tongue in cheek, but he's secretly an evil genius. Like he's much more intelligent than he wants people to think, and that's kind of like he keeps it close to his chest, or tries to. I'm a little bit out of the loop the last few weeks on the latest UFO news. I've had a kind of strange few weeks. I wonder if I've seen you kind of doing a few tweets here and there, even if I haven't looked in much detail. But is there any kind of recent news or pertinent updates that you think you'd want to share with people that might be in the same boat as me, that kind of haven't followed it super closely, say in the last month or so?
Oh, good question. What things you get so involved in all the little things that go on that sometimes you lose track of the big picture.
Yeah. And then sometimes if you're like me, you kind of, if you have some, real life stuff and you lose track for a few weeks or a month, you just feel like, everything's passed you by and you're like, whoa, what's happening?
Right.
Have I missed? What have I missed? Yeah.
I mean, there have been a few more edits to some of the congressional legislation, right, on UAPs.
Mm-hmm.
So, Congress still has their eye on it. That's still going on. I don't think there's been anything real major that's happened in the world of UAPs, that would interest, let's say, that would garner attention from the overall general public. I mean, it garners plenty of attention from those people in the little tiny world of UFOs, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
there's a much bigger world out there than that doesn't pay as close attention, maybe as you and I would pay attention to on the subject.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that little world is hopefully growing, but it's not as fast as I would like. I guess.
Well, I tell you, it is growing a lot. I mean, we just finished our SCU conference, right? And we had a packed house, and we had another 100 people that viewed it via the internet, and it was a lot of academics, so that would be kind of boring in general to most people, right? But here's the part that's not as boring, is that if you would go back 30 years ago, there were almost no people in the scientific community that looked at this subject, and if they did, they operated in what they called the invisible college, right? So they kind of would work together, but not tell anyone they were looking at the UFO subject, right? But today it's much more out in the open. I mean, there's still stigma, but it's much better than it was 30 years ago. I mean, look at the organizations that have come into existence. Besides SCU, you have the Galileo Project, the Soul Foundation, UAPX. There are a number of academic type of groups now, and that wasn't there 30 years ago. So it's changing slowly, but it is changing.
Yeah, you're right. And if you step back, it's kind of, you are right, it's changing quite fast, actually.
Right,
it just feels, because we're in
back,
the midst of it, it feels, like slow.
It feels slow.
Yeah.
But
you're
yeah,
right,
if you step back, it has changed a lot, especially in the last 7 years since the New York Times report.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. One kind of fairly recent news that I did kind of hear a bit about, again, I didn't go deep into it and I haven't researched it much, is this guy Jason Sands. Did you hear about this? And what are your thoughts on Jason Sands? Like, is this a legitimate whistleblower? Are we unsure? Like, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so his name's, has popped up, right?
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, I've heard both sides. I've heard, it's legitimate, but I've heard more that it's, it's not, he's not legitimate. So, and I don't want to impinge on someone's credibility one way or the other. The only thing from experience is, I'll tell you this, is you have a UFO event and you have someone who testifies about it or comes out about it. And then afterwards, there's always these people that kind of jump on the train at the last minute. And often it's not because they were truly on the train to begin with. They just want to be part of the show.
Yeah.
And whether or not, which role he's in, I guess time will tell. But from what I'm hearing so far, it's more likely that there aren't real legs to his story.
Yeah. You tweeted recently, I said I haven't been following your tweets, but I obviously have seen a couple of them. You tweeted recently saying that numerous intelligence professionals who normally maintain a low profile attended your SCU conference and kind of gave you the information that they'd purchased your book, which obviously made you feel good, which is great. Did they give you any kind of interesting information? Is there anything you can share? Sorry, just go for it.
Yeah, sure. I can tell you there is a significant part of the intelligence community. I mean, it appears to be split, right? You have a part maybe of the intelligence community that's kind of on board with Arrow. And then you have another part of the intelligence community that's on board with David Grusch. They're saying, no, this guy's right. That's the facts. We can't tell you more, but he's right? Because they can't disclose any specific details, but they will tell you, yes, I believe we have craft, right, that are being reverse engineered, but they won't give a detail, right? Only those generic type statements. And I guess my understanding is they can do that without breaking their vows, but they can't give details without breaking a national security vow. But it was like, I was surprised at how large a block of guys in the intelligence community that say, no, this is real. So, I'll tell you, Ben, if you had asked me the same question 3 years ago, do we have a crash disk or saucer of some type? I would have said it's less than 1%. Just remote. I don't think it's very likely at all. Today, I'm kind of 50-50 on it, right? And like I said, it's not a question of science. It's a question of just fact. Yeah. Either we do or we don't. And that's really an issue that Congress needs to push, right? The intelligence community, those guys, for example, that were at our conference, they can't push it. Congress is the only one that has the ability to push that if they want to.
Yeah, Absolutely. And it's great that you've been able to change your stance on that so significantly as well. It shows that you're open to new information and you're willing to, like change accordingly. You're not just kind of stuck in the mud on one thing and like not, ignoring new information. Of those intelligence officials that you met at the conference, like how many of them are like known publicly or did you know about beforehand? And how many of them, again, are not an exact number, but just approximately, are like people that were new to you and you're like, oh, okay, I never, I had no idea about this person.
I don't think any of them are known publicly.
Interesting. Okay.
To my knowledge.
Yeah.
And most of them, are roughly the same level Grusch was at. Right.
Do you get the impression that some of them was the people he was getting the information from, these 40 whistleblowers, well, not whistleblowers, these 40 people that talked to Grusch?
Yeah, that's hard to say, right? Because you're left with this. Okay, how much of it is unique, valid information, and how much of it is this person tells this person who talks to this person, and they have coffee together, and you know what I mean? Kind of like we do. And that it's harder to say. That's why it's question of fact, and someone has to nail the fact down. Right now, for me, it's in my shades of gray.
Right. Okay. Got you. Yeah, that's why you're more interested in the documents, and it's why you want us to press and find out if there's a craft or crafts in possession of either government or private aerospace, because obviously that changes the game, and then it can be in the realm of science to like do tests on these things and find out more about the craft and all that kind of thing. But
the one thing I will say is that if we have one of those craft, assuming we have one, I would be shocked that we could reverse engineer it. I would put that like close to next to impossible.
But maybe baby steps towards reverse engineering, or little things that we maybe manage.
There would be little things, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, you could take spectrometers and you could determine what the hull was made of, right? And if you're able to chip off pieces of it, then you could get even more information through material science. But that might, it's kind of like my cell phone here, right? Someone is trying to reverse engineer it that has no knowledge of our science.
Yeah, me.
Right? they could look. They might figure out that this is a plastic material.
Yeah.
On the back here. So what do they do with that? Do they go make an aircraft out of plastic? Do they go try to make a piece of rectangle out of plastic? I don't know. There's not a lot they can do with that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could reverse engineer the main guts of an alien technology. And that's based on my experience in a semiconductor industry, where, for example, I worked at Advanced Micro Devices, and one of the things we did is we would reverse engineer an Intel product.
Right.
And it could take us a year. And that's on a technology and a competitor that we're very close to, and we understand all the details.
Yeah.
And it still takes a year. So I can't imagine reverse engineering a technology where I don't even have the science of their civilization, right? Because, science is built brick by brick, right? Like the computer chip that goes in this, there was scientific knowledge that figured out how do we want to make the metal wiring, right? And how do we want to make these thin gate oxides that make the transistors? And every last one of those is science building upon itself. So now go grab some alien technology and you don't know anything about how their science built up to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, that could be one of a multitude of reasons as to why the government covers it up. Because obviously, if they did completely manage to reverse engineer it, then they'd want to profit off it in certain ways, right?
Well, absolutely. And here's my thought, Ben. Let's just make the assumption they found this. They got a couple of craft that crashed in the 1940s or 1950s. They probably looked at it then, couldn't figure the heck out of it, mothballed it. Sometime in the year 2000, some guy goes, "Hey, remember about that? well, our technology is really advanced now. Let's go let's go pull that thing out of mothball and look at it again. And off they go. And of course, they can't get any much, probably get a little farther along, but not much farther along than they did 40 or 50 years ago.
Yeah. Although, as a last word on that, just to be kind of super speculative, as you've probably heard some people kind of with the idea of some of these craft could be like gifts, like left intact, whatever, in certain places. Maybe they left an instruction manual or some tips and advice in there, or gave us one that was like, on a plate, ready to be giving a kid something to help them figure out how to build something. I don't know. But yeah, who knows really? On the last thing quickly on the subject of the people you met and some of these intelligence professionals, are you aware at all of any first-hand whistleblowers that would be or will be going public this year, 2024? Do you have any knowledge about
other
that?
than the guy you mentioned, right? Which supposedly the word is he's not a legitimate whistleblower, and like I said, I could be totally wrong. That's just what I hear.
Yeah,
I don't know personally, whether he's a valid whistleblower or not, but none of the guys that were there, at least as far as I'm aware, saw a craft with their own two eyes, right? As far as I know. I don't know.
And none of them either expressed any intention of going public or anything like that to you either?
No.
Yeah, fair enough. So I was wondering if now it maybe was a good time for you to spend a few minutes or however long you want really, and just to say a few words about your latest book that you published. So the UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Don't Know, what we do know and what we don't know, what we know and don't know.
Don't know, right? That title.
I made a meal of that.
You did, Ben, but that title's so long, right? That the average person is probably not going to remember it. So if they want to find the book, like on Amazon,
UFOs by Robert Powell.
Right. It's just put in Robert Powell and put the word UFOs and they'll get it.
That's well, for the purposes of this, I'll put the link in the description for anybody that's interested.
Yeah. We can do that. And then they'll have the link. But so I wrote this book. It kind of encapsulates my whole view of the phenomenon. And that's, that's with 10 years of experience, unlike Arrow, who wrote the report based on 12 months of work that, that they did on it. So I wrote it for the average person, right, that might not have been spending their life studying UFOs, right? It's a subject of interest, just like maybe global warming is a subject of interest to someone. So the book begins with a brief history so that someone who's not familiar with the subject can become familiar with it. But yet, some of the cases I put in that history are cases many people who study UFOs are probably not aware of. So I show the history, and then I use a chapter to explain how we didn't just suddenly, as a society, go crazy and decide we're all going to start watching UFOs, right? How did we get from not having very many UFO reports at all in the early 20th century to suddenly, beginning in 1942, moving to where we are today with hundreds of thousands of UFO reports? So I explain why there's some reality to this, right? And we didn't suddenly become a society seeing leprechauns, right? And it's not like that.
Yeah.
And then I look at some of the strangeness of UFOs, right? The bending of light, the objects that are not aerodynamic, like some guy reports of a barbell-shaped object moving through the sky, right? That's not what you're going to make up if you want to make up a story. So I go through all the strangeness aspects, and then I concentrate on extreme acceleration, the ability of an object to suddenly stop, suddenly take off at high rates of speed, suddenly stop again. We don't have objects that can do that. An F-35, for example, can hover, right, by expending a lot of fuel. And he's not going to hover long before he runs out of fuel. But he can hover, and then he can begin to accelerate at about a little bit over 1 G-force. Not much acceleration at all compared to what UFOs do.
Yeah.
So I spend time explaining why this capability of sudden movements and acceleration indicates that you have an intelligent force and it's intelligently controlled, right? And it's not something we can do. So I spend a chapter there. And then I go through kind of how society handles this and how government has handled it and how in the future where we need to go, right? How do we solve this? I mean, do we keep having militaries look at this for the next, we've done it for 80 years. Do we keep doing that for another 80 years and see where we are in 80 years?
Yeah.
I don't think so. So I put forth some theories on what we need to do. And I also talk about the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is my favorite. That doesn't mean that is where these things come from. It's just my personal, based on the facts we do have, you know, what I consider the most likely. And I talk about, so would these ETs be friendly, unfriendly? You know, what would we expect them to be like? And so I go through some theories on that.
Yeah. Fascinating. It does sound really interesting. And again, for anybody interested, the name is UFOs. A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. I got it right.
You got it exactly right there.
Yes. Okay. And the link is in the description. And could you just name one of the cases that you said you think even seasoned kind of researchers won't be familiar with? Just we won't go into it this time. Maybe in a future kind of conversation. But just name drop. Say one or two cases that you think are not enough known about.
Sure. There's one case based on two guys fishing in the Gulf of Mexico that encounter two disc-shaped objects up close. So that's a case a lot of people probably are not familiar with that I go into and talk about.
Yeah.
Another one is, and the one I just mentioned was like in the year
I was going to ask the year. Okay,
yeah.
Cool.
No, I'm sorry. It wasn't year 2000. It was like about 1975.
Okay.
Is when that one happened. Then there was a case in 1968. It's actually in Project Blue Book, but most people aren't aware of it. It happened at Minot Air Force Base, and there's radar images of the UFO. It's taken by the B-52 bomber that was told to go look for this object because this object had been seen and hovering over an ICBM base. And a lot of people are not aware of that. And there's a lot of really good information in that case. That was Minot Air Force Base in October of 1968.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And you said while you were kind of talking about the book, you mentioned that you think the extraterrestrial hypothesis is the one that best fits the facts. And you also kind of asked the question of are they friendly or not, which is obviously something that we all want to know. So why do you think the ET hypothesis best fits the facts? Do you think it explains everything, or do you think it kind of leaves a little bit to be desired and maybe there could be something more mysterious? Could there be multiple different things happening at once, like the ET hypothesis being correct, but also something else, like you're aware of all the popular things, future humans, interdimensional stuff, maybe something that's lived on this planet with us. What's your take on all that? And are they friendly?
Right. Okay, so on the extraterrestrial hypothesis, it could explain all of it, but does not necessarily explain all of it. Yeah. And so I say that because if you're dealing with multiple extraterrestrial civilizations, right? A civilization that's hundreds of years in advance of us is going to, appear much different than one that's a million years in advance of us, right? Yeah. And how they present themselves could be totally different. So, you could explain everything with the extraterrestrial hypothesis, but that does not mean that that's truly, the explanation, because the problem is we don't know where any of these individual intelligence originates from. We don't know for certain if they're extraterrestrial or for certain or interdimensional or what they, might be. Yeah. So the reason I favor the extraterrestrial hypothesis is in the last 30 years, we have discovered over 6,000 extrasolar planets. And many of those are in what they call Goldilocks zones, zones where the Earth could exist. So you don't, if I'm looking for a source of intelligence, that's the easiest one to look for, right? I mean, over 6,000 planets. And the reality is there are millions of planets within our galaxy that could be Earth-like.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, okay, if you have intelligence out there, do they know we're here? Right? And 20 years ago, most scientists would have said, no, how would they know we're here? You know, there's billions of stars in the galaxy. How would they know we're here? Well, the answer is the same way that today we are looking out and saying, okay, here's a planet that's in the right spot. And now we're starting to look at actually the spectrum of those atmospheres and those planets to say, is there methane in the atmosphere? Is there oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide? You know, those things that are in our atmosphere.
Yeah.
So anyone that's out there is doing the same to us. They're looking at Earth and they go, you know what? That planet is mostly made of water. And there's a few land masses on it. And it's got oxygen and nitrogen, the right elements for life. And then as their telescopes are more advanced, they're able to look at the dark side of our planet, right? They're able to mask out our sun's brightness and zero in on Earth. So what do they see? They see light being emitted off the dark side of the planet that's away from the sun, right? So it's like, why is there light on this planet? Right? So immediately they know that there's intelligence on the planet. So there's no problem for someone knowing we exist. So the next question is, if they can get here, right? What are their intentions? Is it just to observe? Is it to conquer? Is it to just, fly by and say hello and then leave? So there's this one theory. It's called the Great Filter, which says, why aren't there, because of all these planets, why isn't ET just all over the place?
Yeah, where are they? Yeah.
Right. So in the Great Filter is that something eliminates them. So my view, it's a combination of that and the fact that they would not want to disturb our society. So think about this. As a civilization develops, take ours, for example, you develop the ability to destroy yourself long before you develop the ability to journey to the stars. And the reason is it takes a lot more energy to get to the stars than it does to destroy your home planet. Right. So that means as we develop, it will be probably several hundred years before we have, interstellar travel. The question is, will we destroy our planet before then? Because if you have an aggressive civilization, right? Because, we're thinking about ET. Is ET aggressive? So think about, what if ET is aggressive? Well, when that ET had developed as a civilization, when they got to our point, they would have annihilated themselves long before they went to the stars, right? Because the aggressive civilization is going to destroy itself. Because just like we may do that, because I think you could argue right now that we are an aggressive civilization.
Oh, most definitely. I think it's not even an argument.
Right. We're not very benign.
Yeah.
And if we don't change, right, we will likely annihilate our civilization. Whether it's totally annihilate or just send ourselves back to the Stone Ages, we will annihilate civilization before we get to the stars. So the argument is, anyone who makes it to the stars is a more benign civilization. They've learned to control their wars and not, attack each other constantly.
Yeah.
So if you take that into account, then that means any ET that comes here is likely benign, and they're likely going to be considerate of our civilization, right? They're going to think, okay, if we land and make ourselves known, that will be very disruptive to that society. So it's more likely all they'll do is come by, observe, maybe occasionally interact, but not in a way that would disrupt our civilization. So that's kind of my view of why ET is not likely to be aggressive. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not an aggressive ET out there somewhere that somehow broke through that barrier, right?
Yeah.
But odds are that they won't be.
Yeah. I definitely, I like the sound of the theory. It sounds pretty reasonable to me. I think the way that they would break outside of that is obviously if you kind of had, say, one world government that took control of everything early on and, had like the entire global population living like, just trapped and unable to, make any impact. And it's just kind of this elite group that then take us out there. The aggression would be not stopping them then, I guess, in that sense. But yeah, for the most part, I agree with what you're saying. And I agree that the ET hypothesis still seems like the most kind of logical and rational and the one that best fits everything to me. But I was on that quite strongly before. Now I maybe sidled a little bit to the I just don't know in terms of the origin. But
and what you just said, Ben's correct. I mean, I don't know either. None of us really know. All you can do, it's like shades of gray, and it's like, okay, I think this is the most likely, this could happen. Absolutely. This could happen, but I think to me that's the most likely explanation.
I think I still agree. I just then I have these kind of I think maybe it doesn't explain everything, and then I just think, okay, maybe there's more to the whole thing. But I still agree with you again that when you say, if there's a 1,000,000-year-old civilization or a 5 million-year-old civilization or whatever, it might be completely. It might seem like it's not ET because it might seem interdimensional. It might seem like it's something else just based on.
And it might even be, right? If it's 5 million in advance, they probably even know how to move between dimensions, I guess. So
wild stuff. I got a couple of questions here from some patrons and listeners that we'll kind of quickly address, and then maybe I have a quick fire kind of round, if that's cool. So this question here is from one of my patrons. Some researchers claim current UAP disclosure efforts are being carefully managed or controlled by the deep state, with possible motivations including 1. Building a UFO threat narrative to increase funding to the military-industrial complex and allow for emergency powers legislation, and 2. Allowing a breakaway society with reverse-engineered or advanced technology to re-enter our society. What are your thoughts on those ideas?
So on the second idea first, I kind of discussed that earlier when I said I don't believe we could reverse engineer. And I don't believe we can advance our science drastically by reverse engineering a craft. In terms of the first question, I don't. I've wondered about that sometimes when the Navy got involved in the whole UFO thing, because it used to be an Air Force only. So I was wondering, so why's the Navy in here? Maybe they're trying to get a bigger chunk of the defense budget away from the Air Force or something, right? But probably the reality is, with the war in Ukraine and all the constant wars that we have across the planet, the military has plenty of excuse to garner this giant budget, that they always garner within the United States. So I was trying to remember if I remember my facts right. I think the United States sells more weapons than the next 7 nations combined.
Wow.
That just gives you a feel for the size of our military industrial complex.
Yeah, absolutely. And a taste of like the humanity and like how we operate and the fact that we're building all these weapons, selling them to people, and then they shoot people with them and kill them, and we're like, oh no, Look what
Yeah,
they're
but what a
doing with the
terrible
guns
thing.
we
What
gave
did you
them.
do that for?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Meanwhile, we continue to line our pockets with selling the weapons. It's just, the mind boggles, doesn't it? Here's another question from a listener. Do you think there are any connections between ancient Atlantis and modern day UFOs? Obviously, a bit more speculative, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
Right. I mean, yeah, that's very speculative, but I mean, it's a possibility, right? I mean, there's we do know that there are a lot of UFO reports that come out of the ocean.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call those USO, underwater submersible objects. So it's possible, right, that you could have a presence deep in the oceans, because
Mm-hmm.
we don't know where everything is in the ocean, especially when you're at depths of 4, 5, and 6 miles.
Yeah.
So that's and so maybe that's where the rumors of an Atlantis, arose. That's a possibility. We don't have any facts to prove it, but it's a
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so now we'll jump into this kind of quick fire round. We'll try and get through these kind of as quick as we can, I guess. I'd love to spend more
Okay.
time on
Yeah,
it,
we'll do
but I
quick
know we
ones.
have a limited, amount of time together today anyway. So this first one kind of aligns a little bit with that question and with your response to that question. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on potential connections between UFOs or UAP and water, and at the same time, the connection between this phenomenon and nuclear energy and or weapons.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection to UFOs in water in terms
Mm.
of uh, seeing them come in and out of water. And in terms of nuclear weapons, I would suspect that's a curiosity feature where they're interested. Okay, what are these guys doing with nuclear power? How
Yeah,
advanced are they?
keeping tabs kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about with the water? Do you have any kind of, again, I know it's kind of speculation at this point, but do you have any kind of personal leanings on why the interest in water? Is it because they have some kind of base underneath there?
Well,
Is it because it helps to power the craft in some way? Or,
yeah, I would not think it. I mean, water is the most common element.
yeah,
It actually is the most common molecule in the universe.
yeah,
So they can get that anywhere. But
yeah.
I think it's more likely that it that's a place where they can, for example, have a base if they had a
Mm-hmm.
base. Because we do know from some work we've done in the SCU on USOs or underwater craft that two of the most common places where there are reports are in
Mm-hmm.
Catalina Island and off Puerto Rico. And both of those areas have a large trench that
Yeah.
goes very deep in the ocean in both areas. So it's that's a possibility.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think of I can't remember which case it was. Might have been Lake Michigan, but I always remember this image of like the UFO kind of with like just a tube of water, up to this UFO, and like there's plenty of interesting things going on with that. But yeah, wild. So you think the ET hypothesis best fits the facts, as you've said. Let's assume it is some kind of extraterrestrial civilization or civilizations that are visiting us here or interacting with us. How long do you think they might have been here? Again, I know we're in kind of speculation, but yeah,
Right.
what do you think on that?
Especially if you assume there's more than one civilization out there that has visited
Mm-hmm.
us. There could have been other civilizations that have come and gone over the, millennia,
Mm-hmm.
right? The only thing that it's hard to look back that far in history because you have so few points in time to look at, right? But in the modern era, which I define as beginning in 1942, it's just a huge number of reports. So that's that's when I think ET really began to notice us. Before
Mm-hmm.
that, it may have been just the occasional passing and coming by, because it's really difficult to draw conclusions based on the amount of data we have from ancient history as compared to
Yeah.
modern history.
Or is that maybe when they decided to stop being so covert? Maybe they're like, oh, they've seen enough planes now and things that go in the sky. They're not going to have heart attacks when they see an object in the sky. We can stop to be
Yeah,
so secretive now. We'll still be a
that
bit secretive, but maybe less.
that could be a possibility. You never
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Um, What are your thoughts, just again in brief, on the future human hypothesis? Do you give any weight to that, or where do you stand on that?
Well, the main weight to the future human hypothesis is the shape of the description of the aliens fits actually the shape of a human in the womb, which normally what you see in the womb is kind of what you see as a species develops farther along, at least with mammals. So, for example, if you look at a chimpanzee in the womb, the structure is more like us than it is the chimpanzee. Yeah. So that's what gives argument to this future human. But the problem I have with that is, the whole argument, what if you go back and you accidentally change history, right?
Yeah.
And then you no longer exist because you made this small little change that winds up causing your great grandfather not to exist.
Yeah, the grandfather
so you're
paradox.
Gone. Yeah. So that's the problem I have with the time
my brain
travel.
kind of explodes on that too.
Yeah, mine does too.
What about the abduction phenomenon? Where do you stand on that?
The abduction phenomenon is really interesting, and it's not in my area of expertise, right? You really need someone with a background psychology, sociology, but I've been around the subject enough. Mm-hmm. I see about three possibilities. One is it's totally in someone's mind and is not real, right? Second possibility is it really happens, right? Mm-hmm. They were physically abducted. Third possibility is an ET civilization puts that abduction in your head, right? And if it's in your head, it's no different than if it happened or didn't happen, right? Because our reality exists on our memories.
Yeah.
That's what makes reality for us.
Yeah.
So if you have a civilization advanced enough to basically run TV shows into our head, then it's real for the person it happened to. Mm. You might not be able to prove it to anyone else, right? Because you can't get a hold of a piece of skin tissue from the alien or some DNA off of the alien as you touch him or anything like that. Because if it all happens like a TV show in your head, then it's real to you, but you can't, there's no way you can, prove it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a leaning out of those, or are you just kind of open to it all?
If I had to lean towards, I would lean towards those events and thoughts were implanted in the individual's head. Yeah, that would be my leaning.
Okay. Which I guess gives me some kind of idea to my next question that I was going to ask you, which is, we all know about the kind of common terms of the nuts and bolts. So we have the kind of crowd of nuts and bolts people in the UFO community, as it were, that think this is all physical. And then we have, the side that are more open to the idea that it's something more mysterious, something potentially interlinked with consciousness. Where do you stand on that? And is there anything you want to say on that?
And what was the last thing you said, Ben? Did you say AI or
consciousness? Just... I mean, if you want to say anything about AI as well, but more like, nuts and bolts versus the idea of consciousness being involved in some kind of mysterious ways. And
so I'm a little bit of a merger of the two. I'm basically nuts and bolts, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm nuts and bolts, I have to be aware that if civilization is far enough advanced, right, they may be able to control energy in ways we can't, which means you could have plasmas, right, or plasma balls that are actually a form of vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. But to us, it's just plasma, right? Yeah. And you could have a sufficiently advanced civilization that they can affect our consciousness and what we see as reality, right? Yeah. So I believe that all of it originates from nuts and bolts, but a sufficiently advanced society has gone beyond nuts and bolts, I guess you might say. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I definitely see what you're getting at there. I recently spoke to a few people on about that kind of, the merging of the two. I spoke to Dr. Michael Nahm, who's a biologist, and we talked about, he wrote a paper on the commonalities of UAP and psi. And we talked about that in detail. You might be interested in that. And then I also spoke with Mike Cleland and Joshua Cutchin, who are both researchers and look more at the kind of, esoteric and more mysterious kind of angles of this, rather than yourself, who looks at it from the more kind of data angle. But interesting stuff. Have you ever seen a UFO yourself?
No, I've never seen one myself. That the aliens do not like me, I think.
yeah, fair. I've never seen anything completely concrete. I'd love to see something that it sticks with me forever and is beyond kind of reasonable doubt, but maybe one day. Have you ever had any other kind of anomalous experiences, such as, just one example of many would be like a precognitive dream, something that you kind of you dream about, and then 2 weeks later or the next day, whatever, this exact situation happens in your waking life. Have you ever had anything bizarre like that?
Yeah, I think sometimes everyone has had a certain level of precognitive feeling, right? And of course, then you always wonder, okay, did I really dream it that way, or is my memory changing from, what just happened to what I thought I dreamt, several days ago. So every once in a while I've had something like that, maybe once or twice in life, but not. I definitely would not say I was in the camp of having, common psychic phenomena occur.
Yeah, not regularly. Yeah, but as you say, I think this kind of stuff does happen to everybody. Most people that are not really familiar with it or comfortable with it will probably dismiss it as coincidence or this or that. And of course, a lot of it could be coincidence, but this stuff does seem to happen, and there's interesting research on it too. Do you, again, this one is just kind of your personal opinions and you kind of say whatever you're comfortable saying, but it's a topic that this podcast covers a lot along with UAP, and that would be the question of, what do you think happens after we die?
Yeah, after we die, I'm a religious person, Methodist, what you would call liberal Methodist. And so my view after we die is we go back to God. Right. So, and when I say God, I don't think of heaven as this physical place where you go, right? And, all that. It's more of a single unity of what you might call love, right? And where your self-ego dissipates and you're part of the whole. Right. You're not an individual like we are right now. Because if you think about it, all of our sins and our problems in the world and everything, it's because of ego. And if you take ego away, then it's totally different. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing. I think that there could be a world where ego is dissipated, but some remnants of, personality or individualism does remain. But absolutely, again, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, because I know it could be quite a personal thing for people, and it kind of still can be hard for lots of people to talk about, but it's, again, something I tackle on this show. So again, thank you so much for your time today, Robert. I really appreciate it. Do you have any last words or a message you wanted to leave with people that have watched this or listened to this today?
Yeah, I would just say it is one of the most interesting topics that I've studied in my lifetime. And what makes it so interesting is that the potential of first contact, right? Whenever that happens, that will be something that really affects humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Your first official contact, let's say.
Yeah. So,
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, and I look forward to talking again about the Stephenville UFO incident very soon.
All right, thanks, Ben. I enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you to Robert Powell for talking with me. Thank you to our patrons for their invaluable support, and thank you for listening. Please check out Robert's books via links in the description. Please subscribe to continue unraveling the universe with us, and if you want to help us keep making content, please consider a monthly contribution via Patreon. Thank you.